There are towns in Ontario right now, the same province where a semi-detached house in Toronto can run past $1 million, where you can buy a full home for around $40,000, and almost nobody wants them. You would expect a price that low to disappear off the market in a weekend. It does not. These houses sit for months, sometimes years. And the question everyone asks first, the same question I asked first, is what is wrong with them? The honest answer is usually nothing is wrong with the house. Something happened to the town. The mine closed. The mill shut down. The railway stopped running through. And once the reason people moved there in the first place disappeared, the people started leaving too, and prices just kept sliding until they landed somewhere that sounds like a typo. But here is what almost nobody covering Ontario real estate is telling you. A town that emptied out because one industry left is not a broken town. It is a town where the math has quietly flipped in favor of anyone whose income does not depend on a local job. Today, 10 Ontario towns, where houses cost around $40,000, sometimes less, where the market has gone almost silent, and where that silence is exactly why a retiree, a remote worker, or a cash buyer willing to trade convenience for space should be paying attention. Stay until number 1, because the price on that one is lower than anything else on this list, and it comes with a lake. Let's take a look. Number 10. Iroquois Falls, in the Cochrane district of northeastern Ontario. Iroquois Falls was built almost entirely around a single paper mill, Abitibi's operation, which for most of the 20th century was the reason the town existed at all. The mill has scaled back dramatically over the decades as the newsprint industry contracted worldwide, and the town's population has followed that decline in a straight line since the 1970s. What is left is a genuinely well-laid-out small town, wide streets, a real downtown core, and housing stock that was built solidly because it was built for mill workers who expected to stay. My honest assessment: winters here are long and serious, well below anything Southern Ontario experiences, and the nearest larger hospital is in Timmins, about 45 minutes away. But if you are retired or working remotely and do not need a local paycheck, the combination of a genuinely livable small town and a price this low is difficult to find anywhere else in the province. Homes here have sold in the $35,000 to $50,000 range. But the next town on this list has an even smaller population and an even smaller price. Number 9. Elk Lake, in Timiskaming District. Elk Lake is one of the smallest incorporated communities in northern Ontario, a former mining and forestry town that has been quietly shrinking for decades as both of those industries mechanized and consolidated elsewhere. What remains is a tight community on the water, genuinely good fishing and hunting access, and a population small enough that everyone knows everyone. My honest assessment: there is no hospital in town, minimal retail, and the nearest full services are in New Liskeard, a real drive on a rural highway. This is not a place for someone who wants a coffee shop within walking distance. But for a hunter, an angler, or someone who wants total quiet and does not mind driving for groceries, homes here have sold for well under $40,000. That is a full house, on real land, for less than a used car costs in the city. Most of these buyers are leaving. The next town trades the isolation for a little more infrastructure. Number 8. Englehart, also in Timiskaming District, along Highway 11. Englehart grew up as a divisional point on the old Timiskaming and Northern Ontario Railway, and like almost every railway town in this region, when the rail operations consolidated and the local workforce shrank, the town's population followed. What is left is a small but functioning main street, a K-12 school, and a community that has held on better than some of its neighbors specifically because Highway 11 still runs straight through it. My honest assessment: Winters are long, the economy is thin, and the nearest hospital with any real capacity is in New Liskeard or Kirkland Lake, both a real drive. But the reframe here is the same one that applies to almost every town on this list. If your income travels with you, a pension, CPP and OAS, remote work, savings, then the thin local economy that scares off most buyers simply does not apply to your situation. Homes in Englehart have sold in the $30,000 to $50,000 range, and if you think that is hard to believe, the next town will make you check the listing twice. We are 5 towns in. Before we keep going, I want to point something out. Every single town on this list so far has the exact same story underneath it. One industry, a mill, a mine, a railway, either shrank dramatically or disappeared completely, and the town never found something else to replace it. That is not a reflection on the town itself. It is what happens to any economy built around one employer when that employer scales back. Keep that pattern in mind, because it holds for the rest of this list, and the prices only get harder to believe from here. If you are the kind of person who would rather own a paid-off house on quiet land than rent an apartment in a city you cannot afford, you and I think the same way. Subscribe, because the second half of this list is where the real numbers are. Number 7. Kirkland Lake in Timiskaming District, once one of the richest gold mining towns in the entire country. At its peak, Kirkland Lake had multiple producing gold mines and a population to match. Most of those original mines closed decades ago as the easily accessible gold ran out, and although some mining activity continues in the region today, it employs a fraction of what the town was built to support. What remains is a real town with real infrastructure left over from its boom years. A hospital, a proper downtown, multiple schools, built for a population several times its current size. My honest assessment: the job market outside of the remaining mining and government positions is limited, and this is still a genuine drive from any major southern Ontario city. But the infrastructure built during the boom years did not disappear when the population did, which means you get small city services at small village prices. Homes here have sold in the $40,000 to $70,000 range, occasionally lower. The next town is smaller, quieter, and even less discovered. Number 6. Matheson in Cochrane District, along Highway 11 between Kirkland Lake and Timmins. Matheson is a farming and forestry community that has never been large, and like the rest of this stretch of northern Ontario, its population has drifted downward for decades as agricultural operations consolidated and forestry mechanized. What is left is genuinely rural, open land, a small downtown, and a slower pace than almost anywhere in the province. My honest assessment: services here are minimal. The nearest hospital of any size is in Timmins, about 40 minutes north, and winters are the full Northern Ontario experience. But for a buyer who wants acreage and does not need much beyond that, the price makes almost anywhere in Southern Ontario look absurd by comparison. Homes here have sold for around $35,000, sometimes less for properties needing work. Property taxes on a home this size run a few $100s a year. The next town is closer to a real city and somehow still just as cheap. Number 5. Hearst, at the far northern edge of the province near the Quebec border. This one is the surprise on the list, because Hearst is genuinely more self-sufficient than most towns this far north, anchored by a working forestry sector and even its own small university campus, a satellite of Laurentian. Population has still declined gradually, the same pattern as everywhere else here, just gentler because the forestry sector never fully collapsed the way it did elsewhere. My honest assessment: this is about as far north as this list goes, a serious drive to any major city, and winters that are long even by Northern Ontario standards. But Hearst has a functioning hospital, a real grocery selection, and a French-speaking community with deep roots and genuine civic pride. Homes here have sold in the $45,000 to $70,000 range. For that price, you get more actual infrastructure than most towns twice as expensive further south. The next 4 towns get cheaper, not more expensive. Number 4. Chapleau in Sudbury District, right at the edge of a genuinely enormous wilderness area. Chapleau grew up around the railway and forestry, and like its neighbors, watched both industries mechanize and shrink over the decades. What survives is a town positioned at the edge of one of the largest crown game preserves in the world, genuinely spectacular hunting, fishing, and wilderness access that people pay real money to visit as tourists. My honest assessment: employment locally is thin outside of forestry and government work, and the drive to Sudbury for anything beyond basic services takes a couple of hours. But if wilderness access is the actual reason you want to move somewhere quiet, Chapleau gives you more of it than almost anywhere else on this list. Homes here have sold in the $35,000 to $60,000 range. The next town brings you back toward the water. Number 3. Cochrane, at the end of the Ontario-Northland Rail Line, in the district that shares its name. Cochrane is best known as the jumping-off point for the Polar Bear Express train up to Moosonee, and that tourism draw has helped it hold on slightly better than some of its neighbors. The underlying story is the same one you have heard 9 times already on this list. Forestry and rail employment shrank, population followed. What remains is a real town with a hospital, a school system, and a small but functioning economy built partly around the tourist rail line. My honest assessment: it is remote, winters are severe, and outside of the tourist season, the pace is genuinely slow. But for a retiree or remote worker who wants real infrastructure without a real price tag, Cochrane may be one of the better balanced towns on this entire list. Homes here have sold in the $40,000 to $65,000 range. The next town has even less infrastructure and an even lower price. Number 2, Gogama, a small community in Sudbury District along Highway 144 between Sudbury and Timmins. Gogama is barely more than a crossroads today, a former rail and mining point that has shrunk down to a population you could fit in a single apartment building elsewhere in the province. What remains is water access, genuine wilderness, and a housing stock that reflects just how far the population has fallen. My honest assessment: there is essentially no local economy left, no hospital, and services of any kind require a real drive. This is about as remote and stripped down as viable housing gets in this province. But homes here have sold for well under $30,000, some considerably less, for properties on real land near real water. That is less than a year of rent in most of the cities these buyers are leaving behind. But number 1 is the town that actually beats that price, and it comes with a lake most of Ontario has never heard of. Number 1. Foleyet in Sudbury District, one of the smallest and least-known communities in this entire province. Foleyet grew up as a rail point and forestry town, and today it has shrunk to a population you can count without much trouble. What makes this the number 1 town on this list is the combination nobody expects: genuine lake access, some of the best fishing in northern Ontario according to the people who actually go there, and a price that undercuts everything else on this list. My honest assessment: this is remote in a way that is not for everyone. The nearest hospital is a real drive. Cell service can be patchy, and this only works for someone who genuinely wants to disappear from the pace of normal life. But for that specific person, a retiree who wants total quiet, a remote worker who wants a lake instead of a backyard, Foleyet may be the single most underpriced address in the entire province of Ontario. Homes here have sold for well under $25,000, some listings considerably lower than that. Rewind that number if you need to hear it again. So here is the thread that ties all 10 of these towns together. and it comes down to exactly three forces. First, the single industry that built each town, a mill, a mine, a railway, mechanized or consolidated or shut down outright, and none of these towns ever replaced it with something else. Second, Ontario's north stayed genuinely remote, while the province's growth concentrated almost entirely in the Golden Horseshoe around Toronto, which means the infrastructure that already existed up here, hospitals, schools, downtowns, never got torn down, it just got quieter. Third, and this is what turns all of it into an opportunity instead of a tragedy, if your income does not depend on a job in the town itself, a pension, CPP and OAS, remote work, or savings, then none of the reasons these towns emptied out actually apply to you. The empty market that scared off everyone else becomes the exact reason nobody is bidding against you. Whether you are looking to retire somewhere quiet, work remotely from somewhere the rest of the province has forgotten, or you are simply someone who does the math before making a big decision, I hope this list gave you something worth thinking about. Those are 10 Ontario towns where a house costs around $40,000 or less, and where that price is not a warning sign, it is a market almost nobody else has bothered to look at. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments which one of these 10 you would actually move to. We will see you in the next one.